Hi, we want to welcome you back to Battle Ready. Thank you for joining us. Get your Bibles out. We're going to start a new chapter, a whole new book, a whole new everything today. So I think we're going to start in Judges. We haven't been to Judges yet, so this will be a new one for our first time.
I cannot remember if we've done Judges or not.
If we have, forgive us. But yeah, we're going to start in Judges chapter 1. And I think to lead us into Judges chapter 1, I want to read the last part of Joshua. Is that what we agreed to?
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of briefly to recap, we've come out of Egypt. Moses has gotten the law. Right? Do you want to go farther than that? Go ahead.
I just want to say, there's certain time periods in the Old Testament.
Okay, go ahead.
And the first one being, and you help me if I miss one, the time of the patriarchs, which would be like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Noah. Right?
Okay, you're starting there. If we're actually doing the time periods, there's innocence in the garden, and then there's the fall, and there's all those things. But and sometimes people call that a dispensation of time. You don't hear that said too much anymore.
Divided up into certain things.
But they divided up into, like after Noah, then you had some conscience. You had certain things they could and couldn't do. Right, so we're not going to go back through all that. But if you start with Moses, then
I was just with the patriarchs. You start with Adam. Mm-hmm. Well, Adam too, and then the first part of Genesis is Adam, and the last verse is Joseph in a coffin in Egypt. Right,
correct.
So that's kind of the age of the patriarchs. Right there, there's fathers in the beginning, and you say there's different times inside that.
There's innocence and conscience in the middle of that, and that's okay.
And then you have Moses come on the scene in Exodus.
And the reason you have the patriarch, my opinion, the patriarchal is you have Father Abraham who starts this. He gets called out. He's on his own. He's new. He's going to obey God and do what he does. And the promise of that future stuff starts again through Abraham. And Abraham has Isaac, and Isaac has Jacob, and Jacob has the 12 sons. And then they get into Egypt through Joseph.
That also starts at Adam when Seth is the next in line. Because
that's true.
The reason it's the patriarchs is because that promise of a Messiah to come is coming through these men.
And it comes through the seed of the woman. Right?
Right.
So it's
through these fathers.
Right. Saying the same thing, yes.
And then at the end of Genesis, when we go into Exodus, you have Moses who's given the law, and he's this leader that reminds them of who they are. And he's, as far as we know from historical accounts, the one who writes down for us Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, right? He's the one who
Deuteronomy, yes,
part of, and then he dies, and there's someone else that's involved somehow. But he is the one who God gives the law to. So you have this age of him leading them out and being this great leader, and them bumbling around in the wilderness for 40 years, learning lessons that are so very important. And the only reason, all these details, I'm just trying to say where we are now. When Moses dies, toward the end of Deuteronomy, it says, Moses, my servant, is dead. Joshua, you have to get up and do what you're supposed to do. And God says, Joshua, I'll be with you just like I was with Moses. Right? That's that famous line of Joshua saying, as for me and my house,
that's just
we'll serve the Lord. You decide what you're going to do, but as for me and my house, we're serving the Lord. And you have that generation, and I wanted you to talk about that comes in with Joshua into the promised land.
Okay, so one thing to kind of remember too that I think is interesting, and I think that people get confused on, is Deuteronomy is the second telling of the law. That I don't know the Greek and Latin for you to say what the word means, but that's actually what it is. So this generation that died off in the wilderness, those that are left, he does it again. He does nothing. God doesn't do anything again, but he starts telling them again.
Moses does
what the law is and what this stuff means. And then Joshua comes along after Moses dies, and he's trying. I mean, Joshua to me seems like Joshua seems like a smaller figure than Moses, but he does a lot of big things. So he's easy to kind of look over a little bit when Joshua starts doing things. But here at the end of this, in Joshua, the last book of Joshua, which is Joshua 24, and it says...
Wait. Okay. Before you get to that, I think, just so everybody's clear on that. So because they doubted, that's what the provocation is. When you hear that in the Old Testament, as in the days of provocation. when they got to the Jordan River to cross over to the Promised Land, that generation you referred to,
and they sent the spies
said,
out.
"We don't think we can do it. We don't believe God about this."
But they didn't just say that; they sent spies out to see it, and they came back and 10
and we
said,
don't think we can do it.
We can't do this. Or
you may not have heard what we just heard. So anyway, so
that's true.
God says, because of your disbelief, none of you will step into the Promised Land, except for Joshua and Caleb, the 2 spies that had faith to believe God's word. And Joshua is the one who actually gets to do it.
And the ones that are under the age of 20.
The baby. So this generation
has now,
that just bringing us not to Judges yet, just to the book of Joshua, are those that were 20 years old and younger, and Joshua and Caleb. Mm-hmm. And they go in, and this is the part I wanted to get to kind of make the first chapter of Judges, which is very violent. Makes sense.
The whole book of Judges is very, very violent.
So the reason I wanted to mention that is that what's going on, the history of what's going on with the Canaanites in that land, we don't know. Mm-hmm. We know one thing. That God has told them that the time of their judgment is here. Mm-hmm. How he's dealt with them, what they've done. That history is somewhere else and not in front of me. But God says he's raising up this nation of Israel, and they're going to come into this land and take it in battle. The nations there have been judged by God. And there's a lot of violence that goes on commands. But when I say that, I'm like, everybody will say, well, that couldn't have been God. But I want you to know, God does the same thing with a nation called Babylon to Israel.
That's right.
He also raises up a Gentile nation, right? Mm-hmm. And a Persian nation to come in and do the same thing. When they're, I can't remember, the phrase is escaping me, but it was like when their iniquity is full. When they're past the point of return and judgment has fallen, he used one nation to displace the other and to bring judgment.
And one thing that you got to remember, and I know that we have a called out nation in Abraham, right? We get a new, but everybody that left the Tower of Babel, however you want to say it, knew about God. Right? They're all it's not that they didn't know. It's that, and Romans tells you that it's that they did know, but they decided, no, we're not gonna go with that. So it's not like, oh no, he's just picking on these people, because that's not what that is. No. I want to say a couple things.
What's the verse that says he raises up kingdoms and he
puts down?
They're just like when we jump into history, we can make a lot of assumptions about right and wrong. We make a lot of assumptions about how we would do things differently. But the truth is, God is in charge of these things, and He's sovereign,
and has always been.
And He allows leadership to arise from very strange places, and from places we'd never predict God would have anything to do with. Mm-hmm. But He raises them up, and they fulfill their purpose, and they're judged for what they do that's wrong. Mm-hmm. So Israel's no different than the other nations that these same things happened, other than the promise of the patriarchs that the Messiah is going to come through their line. So God always preserves.
And that's what so in every sense of the word, this nation is a remnant. Mm-hmm. And then it even smallers down. I don't know, that's the wrong word, but it gets more small as a remnant as we go through Judges, because there are people who will still stay faithful. You see that in Ruth and Boaz. You see that in those stories. But the book of Judges itself...
It's not all people falling away, though.
No, it is not.
It's not. It's a cycle.
It is a cycle. And the cycle repeats itself over and over. I want to say a couple things. I don't know how far we'll get into the first chapter. But you said provocation. Mm-hmm. And I know that sounds like a big fancy church word, provocation, but it means to provoke. It means you don't believe what I told you.
And when you take into context that for these people he sent 10 plagues, for these people
and they've seen this.
He separated the Red Sea.
They saw it.
They gave them water out of a rock. He fed them with manna. Mm-hmm. He gave the Ten Commandments with smoke and lightning on the mountain. And when they get to that river, they say, we don't believe you're strong enough to help us defeat those guys over there.
Yes.
The provocation is, how can your faith be that weak? After all of this.
After all of that.
You've decided, after all that you've seen and all that you've known, that you still don't trust me.
Now, before we get all holy and self-righteous there, because that's where I always had a problem when I started into Joshua and Judges when I was reading. But we are guilty of the same thing. We have seen God do mighty, wonderful works in our lives, in the lives of our friends and our families. We have seen Him do those things. And yet... we will say, "Oh,
be fearful
no, I
when we
can't
get
trust
to the
him,
next part."
and I'm guilty, and I don't want to be guilty of provocation." But provocation is again kind of like Adam and Eve in the garden.
I think it's Hebrews 11. He said, and they died in the wilderness.
And they died, yeah.
Because here's the result of not trusting the Lord.
But look at Adam and Eve.
Your story stops there.
The first second,
right?
the first second they're offered an opportunity to do it their own way. They're already in the garden. They're already talking to God. They're already right there with Him. And the first chance that someone comes along to say, "Yeah, but you know." You believe me or don't you? I mean, I think sometimes it's really just that simple. You believe God or you don't, right? And that's what's hard. Now,
so now that we're at Joshua,
no, wait, we're not at Joshua yet. So the other part of Judges,
Judges
Joshua,
is not Joshua, so we got to get through Joshua.
So getting to Joshua,
yeah.
They start to fall off. He starts to have problems with them toward the end of his life, and it's at the end of his life. It's at chapter 24, the end chapter of Joshua.
Well, you can't tell the end of it until you tell the whole of it.
But
so that new generation goes in, and you guys know the story of Jericho, and you know the story of all these great, wonderful victories. But by the time we get to the end, not for Joshua's sake, but for the other leaders of the other tribes, they're tired. They're tired of fighting. They're tired of following. They're compromising. They're slowing down. And Joshua's disgusted with this. He's like, God has given us a command. He's told us what we're supposed to do. There are enemies in the land. He's told us that this land is ours. And you've done so much, and now you're laying down on the job. Like, where are you? Get up and go. So not only did Moses' generation die in the wilderness because of disobedience and unbelief, Joshua's generation, which starts out gangbusters
in the promised land.
By the time you get to Joshua's death, they've also just went, you know what?
Maybe
we don't want to do this anymore. we don't want to keep fighting. We don't want to keep doing what God's called us to do. We want to just relax a little bit and just go do what we want to do. And Joshua's death is kind of sad in that way because they've not fulfilled completely.
Which is what causes the issues in Judges.
Right.
Because they didn't do what they were supposed to do. But again, that's what we do in church. We fight a good fight. We get through some hard stuff. We do really good, and we get to the end, and we're like, "I'm done.
Yeah,
I'm not going to follow all the rules anymore.
This is too hard,
right?" And I get it. I mean, I'm not talking about people's health, and I'm not talking about how often they attend church. I'm talking about
trusting the Word of God,
the principles of God's Word that you know better. That you know, this is how I'm supposed to act. This is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to do this. That's what I'm talking about. So, then finally...
now read... Now read verse 29 of Joshua 24.
So, verse 29 starts off with...
This is of the book of Joshua.
This is Joshua. This is the last of Joshua, so we can start into the book of Judges. It says, "And it came to pass after these things that Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. And they buried him in the border of his inheritance in Timnath-Serah, which is in Mount Ephraim, on the north side of the hill of Gaash. And Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders that overlived Joshua, and which had known all the works of the Lord that he had done for Israel. And the bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel brought up out of Egypt, buried they in Shechem, in a parcel ground which Jacob bought of the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of silver, and it became the inheritance of the children of Joseph. And Eleazar, the son of Aaron, died, and they buried him in a hill that pertained to Phinehas his son, which was given him in Mount Ephraim." Just by the way, who's Shechem? Do you remember?
I remember he dealt with Abraham.
Shechem is Dinah's fellow too, right?
But here's this thing, that there's so much in those last verses.
There is.
The bones of Joseph.
The bones of Joseph.
So we're talking about, again, the promise of the patriarchs is coming with us. But Joseph said, when God delivers and he brings you into this land, take my bones with you, because he's going to do something there, right? That's where I want to be buried. They go to the spot that they already purchased. This land is not the land of the Canaanites. This land was given to Abraham. This is their land.
This is their land.
Right, and now 400 years plus 60.
Yeah.
later, 400 in Egypt.
Egypt, and probably, yeah.
Whatever, like
at least 60, 80.
So now they are back in the land that Abraham already bought, that Jacob bought from Shechem again over, that Isaac dug wells in. Mm-hmm. The place that they're in is home.
It's theirs.
But nobody recognizes it all these years later, mm-hmm. right? So this last part of this is, okay, everybody who knows is dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's significant.
It is.
Because not only is Joshua gone,
mm-hmm.
their priest is gone
mm-hmm.
that knew the story.
Eleazar.
Not that they don't know, because it's written down and they know it, right? Mm-hmm. But the people that know it on a personal level, they're gone. Mm-hmm. This is a brand new turning of the page generation. And it's like with each generation, God's like, now what are y'all going to do?
Yeah.
How are you going to deal with me? And God is ready in that age to deal with them where they are. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to say that before we got in the book of Judges, that those last verses bring everybody with us, mm-hmm. don't they?
Yes. And in the second chapter of Judges, it says, and I'll just say that real quick because I know we'll get there next week. But in the second chapter, it says, and also that generation were gathered into their fathers. Mm-hmm. All of the ones that came in with Joshua, all the ones that were 20 years old and under that wandered for 40 years. Gone. And now they've come into the promised land.
Now the ones that were, the younger ones, yes. Right. The other ones are gone.
All of those that came over.
Yeah.
Caleb and Joshua and all the ones that came through and over into the promised land and defeated Jericho and Ai and all the things that they did, they're all gone.
When I say this, everybody 55 years and older is going to know exactly what I'm saying. These guys that we're going to talk about in the book of Judges didn't have to fight for it.
Mm-mm. And we talked about that today a little bit, right?
We use the same terminology, just slightly different in America. We talk about the greatest generation. Mm-hmm. And then we talk about what's happened since the greatest generation, mm-hmm. right? We have the same understanding of what this means, that right? You fought to keep us free. And then we are free, and we just take it for granted.
And we make up our rules
and we think it's not as important, and we don't have to worry about that because we've never had to worry about that. So, right? So this generation that had to lean on God moment by moment, battle by battle, day by day, and God's winning the battle. Yeah. They weren't strong enough to beat Jericho. They weren't strong enough to do these things. And God miraculously delivers them. This generation is gone. And the new generation is like, you know what? What's the big deal?
And
we'll share the land. Yeah. We'll share the land with all these people that God's cursed. We'll get along. We'll find a way.
But you got to remember
to get along
when you go way back. Why did he pick Abraham? Not because he was great and wonderful, but because he knew he would train his children. Right? He knew he would tell them. He called them out to show all the heathen, all the pagan, all the non-believing people who God is. They've forgotten. So here's this nation that's coming along that's supposed to do that. What they're not supposed to do. And he tells them this in Judges, but he tells them this in Deuteronomy, he tells them this in the giving of the law. They're not to worship the other gods. Mm-mm. They're not to go after them.
They're not to marry people who worship
they're
other
not
gods.
They're not to have anything to do with that. Right. They're supposed to influence them.
You're not supposed to be
in
business with people who serve other gods. You're not supposed to be in social interaction. Why? Because your children matter. And your children are going to be lost if they start believing lies and they start becoming like this culture that's around you that I told you was judged already.
And the other
I told you was cursed already. And you've decided, no, I want to go ahead and bring that in.
That's right. And the other
it's going to cost you your children.
And all the other, and almost, I don't think I'm wrong, but almost all of the other gods sacrificed children. Mm-hmm. You had human sacrifice in this.
And among many other horrible things.
But that's your children. That's what you're so it's never just, oh, well, they'll have to think a little bit, or, oh, well, what did you sacrifice your children to? I've sacrificed them to gods that aren't interested in their well-being. It's not going to get you right. They're not covered for their sins. But what do we sacrifice our children to?
What have we gotten comfortable with?
Yeah.
And we're like, you know what? It's not a big deal.
Yeah. Because it's just easier to let it not be a big deal than to deal with the situation. Yeah. And that's what God, all from the beginning, has said, don't let this happen.
It'll cost
Stay
you.
firm. Don't let this happen. Right. Because it never is just as easy as, oh, well, we'll just let that one go. Right? It never works that way. All right. Judges chapter 1,
verse 1.
Here we go. Now, after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, Who shall go up for us against the Canaanites first, to fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Behold, I have delivered the land into his hand. And Judah said unto Simeon his brother, Come up with me. Come up with me into my lot, that we may fight against the Canaanites, and I likewise will go with thee into thy lot. So Simeon went with him. What do you think about that first 3 verses?
I think the first 3 verses are a fulfillment of something that Jacob said in Genesis. When he gathered all his sons around his bed and he was getting ready to pass away. And he says, you know what? Judah's going to rule. The crown's not going to pass from, the scepter is not going to pass from Judah. And they're like, okay, we've got a void of leadership here. Who's going to go first? Right? Who's going to lead us?
Now.
And all of a sudden someone goes, Judah.
Well, no, wait. Let me say this. You, in the wilderness, when you set up the tabernacle, the tabernacle's in the middle. And you got 3 on both sides of the tribes, and you got 3 tribes behind, and you got 3 tribes in front. Okay. Who's the very front tribe?
I'm going to guess it's Judah.
It's Judah. It's always Judah. Judah's always the first, because he represents Christ. Right. He represents that lineage where the king is coming. Yep. So it shouldn't have been a question.
But it was.
But it is.
And they say, who's the leader?
Because they don't know. They forgot that that's why Judah's here.
And yet they say.
And then what does Judah say?
Judah said, I need help.
This big brave guy who's supposed to be.
Well, it's not just a guy, the tribe, the people,
I know,
right?
But
he says,
I'll go. Will you go with me? Because I'll go if you go.
Sure.
Right?
So there's not a man named Simeon, but a
tribe.
Part of that.
A whole. Probably, 50,000, 100,000 people?
I guess the equivalent would be like our states. So it would be like Ohio's going to go first and West Virginia's coming with you. It's like the men of these sections.
Yeah, this big stuff.
You know, it's not just one person. No. I just want, because you may have just walked in.
And when you
you may not know that this is not a man named Judah and a man named Simeon.
No, and when you get to numbers, it starts numbering them out, telling you how many there are. There's thousands in each tribe. And that's just the men, and then they count the women different.
So politically they decide, but Judah's going first, but he's not going without Simeon.
But to me,
leadership,
that kind of gives you a picture right there
where the leadership is.
Of what we know.
Yeah.
Because they're doing something every day. Every time they set up that camp, every time they set up the tabernacle, every time they've moved across the wilderness, every time they've done any of that. Remember, they moved when the cloud was gone, and they stayed when it stayed, right? They're doing it, but they have no idea, I don't think, why they're doing it. They forgot Judah's always at the front. That's how it's lined up for the tabernacle. That's the way they're supposed to make their camp every time they make it. I wonder sometimes how many things we know that we take for granted that our younger generation doesn't know. They just know we do it, but they don't really know why we do it. And these guys now are saying, okay, I'll go first, but I'm not going by myself.
With Simeon.
Now, how many times have we said that to our kids? Think about that. How many times have we said, it don't matter what so-and-so does. You have to do the right thing, right? Here we are, and maybe this is oversimplified, or maybe that's not what he meant at all. But when I read this, I think, you should have been ready. You should have been the leader like you're supposed to be, right? You're the leader. Get up here, go. But you're not going to go unless he goes with me. And we do that sometimes, and I wish I was better at that, because I'm guilty of that. I'll go visit so-and-so if you go, because I don't want to go by myself, right? So I guess what I want to impart into this Lessons in Judges, because to me, it's a horrible book. It's hard for me to read this book. It really is. There's a lot of gory, bloody, nasty stuff, and it's hard for me to read this book. But it's better if you can put yourself or what you know in here, human nature, right? So,
yet, despite their fumbling beginnings that you're pointing out, God is with them as they go first in the same. Just as He was with Joshua, just as He was with Moses, just as He was with the patriarchs, God shows up.
Isn't that a little comforting for you, for me? Because it is for me. I'm the one that would be going, I'll do it if you go with me. Right?
And in that situation, it says the Lord delivered.
So verse 4, and Judah went up, and the Lord delivered the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand, And they slew of them in Bezek 10,000 men. Bezek, 10,000 men. And they found Adonai Bezek in Bezek, and they fought against him, and they slew the Canaanites and the Perizzites.
Adonai is the Lord.
And
The Lord of Bezek.
And Bezek means lightning.
The Lord of the lightning.
Oh.
So their first,
kind of like a He-Man
the first
story.
battle in the book of Judges is against the Lord of the lightning, or the glittering brightness. So I think this is not an accident that this is the first account that we have. And I think that it's very symbolic of what we're trying to say about the fact that God raises up whom he will and he puts down whom he will, because what's about to happen, you're correct, is gruesome. Being a student of history, I'm a little bit more okay with gruesome than you are.
I'm not okay with
because
gruesome.
Human beings have been gruesome for all time.
Listen, I know a person who in our church right now is going, yay, they're in Judges.
I'm just saying.
She loves the gruesome.
I'm just saying that human beings are gross.
They
and
are.
What gets ready to be told is gross. But there's a really key passage to this, because when this happens, the man who this happens to says, you know why this is happening?
Well, don't tell that part yet.
I'm not telling all of it. He says, this is happening because this is what
That's
I've
what I
done.
did.
So again, it's not just you going in and all these people are just peaceful and innocent and perfect. No, God has sent judgment on the people of this land, which he makes clear.
And he's told
before
them,
we get here.
Before we get here.
And there's even a time when they're wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, not to go back and belabor, but he says, because the time of the Canaanites was not yet full, God was also still dealing with them.
Trying to get them.
But now
his side
judgment
too.
has come.
Right. So this guy, lightning god guy, says, verse 6, but Adonai Bezek fled, and they pursued after him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and his great toes.
What a strange thing to do.
I agree.
They cut off his thumbs and his big toes.
Now, before we say that,
where did they get an idea like
where
that?
did they get that
From
idea?
him.
From him. So let's see. Verse 7. And Adonai Bezek said, 70 kings, having their thumbs and their great toes cut
60
off,
plus 10, 70. He's done this to 70
gathered
other kings.
their meat under my table, as I have done, so God hath requited me.
He says.
And they brought him to
back.
Jerusalem, and there he died. 70 kings.
Reaping and sowing. They did this because I've done this.
And,
God is judging me for what I've done.
So when you read that, you think...
He doesn't say, these horrible oppressors. He says, I've done
that. To 70
This is
kings
what I've done.
who I kept around my table.
Right. For trophies.
For trophies. So
yeah.
What's the big deal about cutting off your thumbs and your toes?
Powerless.
I can't fight you.
I can't fight you.
I can't shoot an arrow. I can't walk. Right?
He's the Lord of the lightning.
I know.
He's the Lord of the lightning, and now he is without any power at all. And his response is, this came from God.
But
God had allowed him to have power, and now God has taken that power away. There's a recognition in that is a real foreshadowing for the people of Judges.
I agree.
Because God has given them the power in the book of Joshua to do these things and to take this land and win these battles. But just like this guy, right? God gives and God can remove.
And God can take it away.
Right? He can also take it away with their disobedience. So I think there's a reason that's the first account.
I think sometimes when we read scripture and it's, if they'd have beheaded him or if they'd have, which is even more gross, but if they had done that, that would,
But it says the Lord delivered. Right? God is with them in this.
But
this guy says, and the Lord did this.
So, as I have done, so God hath requited me.
Right. What's happened to me is the judgment of God. What's come upon me is God's judgment.
This is worse than just dying.
Because I've gotten
Don't you think?
What I did.
In some regards, this is worse than just being killed. Because he can no longer...
Except that now he's recognized
the Lord. No. I mean...
yes.
That's the purpose of not being killed.
Yeah.
But he still has to live... As a soldier, he's done.
Yeah.
Right? He can't walk without...
He's a trophy.
He's not... He can't... As a warrior, he can no longer be of any value to anybody. If that's where he put all of his pride and his worth, he has nothing now. Just from losing his thumbs and his toes. He can't even you can't hardly even feed yourself, because you
without
can't,
power.
Right? He is brought low, really. All right, verse 8. Now the children of Judah had fought against Jerusalem and had taken it and smitten it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire. And afterwards the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites that dwelt in the mountain and in the south and in the valley. I think this one's so interesting. And Judah went against the Canaanites that dwelt in Hebron. Now the name of Hebron before was Kirjath Arba. And they slew Sheshai, Iman, and Talmai. Heard those names before?
Tell me where.
We saw those guys when we went in to look at this, when we went in to spy out the land, and we saw the giants.
Okay.
Anakims. That's where we saw them. And I don't have a verse for that, but I know.
Kirjath Arba, just a little history for people like history, is the burial place of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Did you know that? Hebron means alliance, right? They changed it is the burying place. This, when I looked up Kirjath Arba, this is just like looking up on the computer. It tells me that is actually the burying place where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are. It's right around Jerusalem, because that's what they're talking about. They're
Who did you
taking
say?
Jerusalem.
Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Because they were, that was Mamre too. Remember that valley of Mamre?
And that's another thing I had these things right here to point out to you as we go through these chapters. Okay. Number one, the names of things change.
Yes, and boy, I wish they did.
And so something can be called something new, and you have to go, now where's that place? And I have to go look it up and see. The other thing is, I want you to pay really close attention to the theme of leadership in this book, because it's really, really, really important what God's trying to tell us about leaders, and also the condition of the women. Because we said that we're going into this cycle of when they follow God and when they turn away from God. And what you're going to see is the farther removed they are from God and His law and His principles, the more that they are cruel and horrible. And the women are kind of like a thermometer for that. When you see the way that women are treated in this book, we start out with a really good story about Caleb and his daughter, and the way that she is honored by her father. And like, you get the idea that this generation is close to God because the women are respected and are honored. And as you further go into this book and they turn away from God, you will see some of the worst cruelty that's in the Bible.
Awful.
And it's from that same thermometer that you go, they're so far from walking with the Lord. And they're going to be judged the way these nations that were there before they got there were judged, the same exact way. That's the thing about God, is the rules apply.
They do.
They apply whether you are the descendants of great people or you are the descendants of people who didn't know God. The rules apply. God is still watching, right? And you can see the same themes repeated. But okay.
Now wait a minute. Keep talking for just a second, because I want to find something, and I'm going to make sure that I'm right before I say it.
Okay.
Those three names. Okay, yes. So if you go to Numbers 13:22.
Okay.
Is that right? It's 33. 13:33. It says, when they brought up an evil report out of the land, and they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, the land that we went in to search is eaten up, inhabitants there are people, we saw giants, great stature. Verse 33, and we saw the giants, the son of Anak, which came as giants and were grasshoppers, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, right, in their sight. But, so it doesn't mention those guys by name, but when you get into Joshua in chapter 15, it says, and unto Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, he giveth a part among the children of Judah, according to the commandment of the Lord, to Joshua, even the city of Arba, and the father of Anak, which city is in Hebron. And Caleb drove thence the three sons of Anak, the giants, Sheshai, Iman, and Talmai, the children of Anak.
And so, now they're not just
and now they're not driven out. Now they're here and dead.
Okay.
But
interesting.
That's where you heard those names.
And
before.
That may still be used also in the way that we're using Simeon and Judah.
Judah, I agree. I think
like
so.
Not just those three men, but the people of those men.
They're people. I agree with that.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting. I don't know. Sometimes I myself personally, I struggle with, okay, is that the same? Because remember, Sinai was also Horeb, right? And then you've got Shechem, which is also where Joseph is buried, which is also Samaria over here. I mean, they start overlapping, and it's hard sometimes to keep them straight, and sometimes you just don't know. You just you don't have any idea. But I thought it was interesting that Judah went against these Canaanites, and it's those same guys they were afraid of when they started going in. And then Caleb fought them and took the land from them for his own.
Yeah. And now we're fighting again.
And now we fight them again and we kill them.
Sometimes, generationally, sometimes we fight the same enemies, don't we?
And
each generation has to fight them again.
But in spiritual...
I thought we already won that battle. No, we
But in the spiritual realm, we fight the same enemy all the time.
That's what I mean.
Right? And...
Same temptation.
You think it would be better, you think it would be easier, and you think you'd put that away.
No, you got to fight it too.
But you got to fight it. All right. And from thence, verse 11, then back to Judges chapter 1, verse 11. And from thence he went against the inhabitants of Debir, and the name of Debir was
Kirjath Sefer. Do you want to know what that is?
Yes, let's tell me what that is.
The city of books.
The city of books.
And not these records.
Interesting. Do we have a message? Do we have wait, let's think about that.
That's the city of books. That's what that means.
That brings to mind something, but it's back in my brain. Verse 12, and Caleb said, he that smiteth Kirjath Sepher and taketh it, to him will I give Achsa, my daughter, to wife. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother,
remember that name,
took it, yes, and he gave him Asath, his daughter, to wife.
I would say Aksa.
Aksa, I'll go with that.
Okay.
And it came to pass when she came to him that she moved him to ask of her father a field.
She goes to the guy who just won her, who apparently she's okay with. Hey, ask my dad for this.
We'd like to have this.
And you'll find out he's not brave enough to. Caleb must be even at his old age, Joshua's died. Caleb and Joshua, I would think, be roughly the same age. We said he would probably have been about 110. That's because... But when she says, hey, ask my dad, the guy doesn't end up asking. She does.
And she lighted off of her donkey, and Caleb said unto her, what wilt thou?
What do you want?
What do you want? And she said unto him, give me a blessing, for thou hast given me a southland.
Wait, we don't bless the girls, we bless the boys, right?
Give me also springs of water.
Who else blessed her daughters? Job. Right? When God was dealing abundantly with his people, it showed up in the way they treated the women. I'm just saying that one more time so that we get that.
That's very
She's
true.
like, hey, you know what? Not only am I marrying this guy, not only am I the prize, hey, I need a blessing too on top of that. And her dad doesn't go, how dare you ask?
Give me land and water. Springs of water.
And he goes,
and Caleb gave her the upper springs and the nether springs.
I'll give you all the water.
He gave her a bunch of water.
Hey, you want something? I'll give you not only what you asked for, I'll give you more than you asked for.
How does your father do you?
Exactly the same thing. And I just think that's such an interesting story. It's like she's inheriting. He already, if you go back to the book of Joshua, his daughters inherited in the land. It's pointed out because that seems like something that everybody didn't do. But Caleb already gave his daughters the land. Right? But she's like, not just the land. How about all the water? And he's like, okay, take it.
Yep.
You can have it.
I won't say that.
Isn't it amazing when things are right?
How blessed
they are.
Yeah. How blessed everybody is. And the children of Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up out of the city of palm trees, and the children of Judah, into the wilderness of Judah, which lieth in the south of Arad, and they went and dwelt among the people. And Judah went with Simeon, his brother, and they...
The nation.
Yes.
Again, because these people are long dead.
That's true.
These people are long dead. Yes. So this is these nations.
That's true. That's a good point. And I guess I don't think to say that because...
I just want you to understand, we're not talking about two guys. No. We're talking about the inheritors of this land of Canaan as nations go into this land. Okay.
Verse 17, and Judah went with Simeon his brother, and they slew the Canaanites that inhabited Zephath and utterly destroyed it. And the name of the city was called
Hormath. I didn't write that one down. Sorry.
I already said that about. See, I thought I found something new over here about Anak, but I'd already known that at some point. Verse 18, and Judah took Gaza with the coast thereof, and Ashkelon with the coast thereof, and Ekron with the coast thereof.
Those are Philistine encampments.
Now that's important.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that important?
Oh, I don't know. Tell me why that's important.
Why is it important?
You tell me.
Have you the news? What's on the news right now about Gaza?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Desolate. Tore up.
Yeah.
Cursed. Right? You
still belongs to someone.
Well, not only that, but if you curse Abraham, you reap the curse. And I just heard a Jewish man this week talk about a prophecy in Zephaniah about Gaza being rebuilt.
Mm-hmm. And there's plans to rebuild right now.
And he made the comment that he doesn't know if he just thought it was kind of, and this is a Jewish gentleman, thought it was very amazing that name. He said because right now, because he said it belongs to Judah.
Of course it does.
It does. Right here's where it says it belongs to Judah, and it's like.
And the Philistines took it,
but
and they
the
took
Philistines
it back.
take it.
And then they take it, and we take it back.
And right now
this is not the first time this land has been in dispute.
And they've still got it. And right now the Philistines still have it. And the 5 cities that we hear about, I don't know whether it's here in Zephaniah now, but they're still there too, and they're still desolate.
This isn't a new
and
war.
Broken down. No, it's an old war from way back when. But I just thought when I saw that, I went, oh. There it is. Mm-hmm. Anyway, and Judah took Gaza with the coast thereof, and Ashkelon with the coast, and Ekron with the coast. And the Lord was with Judah, and he drave out the inhabitants of the mountain, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley, because they had chariots of iron. And they gave Hebron unto Caleb, as Moses said, and he expelled thence the 3 sons of Anak. Mm-hmm. Repeating what we already know, right?
Still disputed land here.
All of it, yes. Because right now, it's not in the hands of Israel. Right now, and in Zephaniah, it says Judah gets it back.
Mm-hmm. And later on in this book, Judah gets it back.
Judah gets back, yep. 21, and the children of Benjamin. Okay, so now we have our first, we can't get them out of the valley.
Because of the chariots of iron.
Right? He handled chariots of iron in the Jordan River, or the Red Sea, right?
So what's happening?
So why can't the why?
Now the victories start to be incomplete. And we went from victory, unexplainable victory. Mm-hmm. No reason for it to be a victory. Mm-hmm. Only God could do that victory. To
we didn't get the ones out of the valley. We didn't get the ones out of the valley. We got the ones off the mountain, but we didn't get the ones in the valley. Verse 21, and the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites that inhabited Jerusalem.
David will later.
But the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem unto this day. And the house of Joseph, they also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. And the house of Joseph sent to describe Bethel. Now the name of the city before was Luz. And the spies saw a man come forth out of the city, and they said unto him, Show us, we pray thee, the entrance into the city, and we will show thee mercy. And when he showed them the entrance into the city, they smote the city with the edge of the sword. Can you believe I said sword? Sword, but they let go the man and his family.
Seems like a nice thing to do, right?
Yeah. And the man went into the land of the Hittites and built a city.
Don't miss it.
And called the name thereof Luz.
Don't miss it. So what's the point of that?
Thereof unto this day.
What's the point of that? It's incomplete victory. Mm-hmm. So they see this man and they say, you know what? We'll make a deal with you. You'll help us. We'll have pity. The assumption is that then he'll be on their side.
But he's not.
That's not what he does. Luz is going to be a problem again. You know why? When he rebuilds Luz, he names it Luz for a reason. Because he's still against you. Mm-hmm. He realizes what you did to his city. And instead of doing what God would have you to do and fight this battle, you make a compromise. These first accounts are here for a reason because they're the pattern of what's going to follow.
And the compromise.
You've said, you know what? I'm not going to completely obey what God said. And you know what? As a result of that, you don't have complete victory. Mm-hmm. You have a partial victory, and you still have made an even more fierce enemy out of this one that you thought would really owe you something and really think you're great. Mm-hmm. When you compromise with them and they hate your God. Do you know that every time, I know people say you over spiritualize things. I don't think so. Because I think every time we make a compromise with our enemy, Satan, we assume then that things will be easier on us because we're not making such a big deal out of everything and we're not fighting against everything. We're just like, stay under the radar. Don't try to make a big buck. It always comes. You are assuming that he has some good intended toward you, or that when you compromise those things away, that it's going to be easier for you. Your enemy hates you.
Yeah, that's true.
And what you just did when you compromised with it is allowed it to come back stronger. Mm-hmm. And we talked about naming things and renamed. Mm-hmm. Not named what God named it, mm-hmm. but renamed it what you named it in defiance of God's judgment. Mm-hmm. Right? So that thing that you keep making friends with, that God told you to get rid of, mm-hmm. it's not going to be easier on you because you did.
Mm-hmm. No.
It's going to come back bigger and stronger and uglier mm-hmm. every time we do that.
That's why God said, utterly destroy
That's why
them.
The toe thing is in here. Because we reap what we sow, and it's a warning to them. And that's why this account is in here, because this compromise leads to trouble later on. And he's like, we changed that name to a name that God gave victory through. But he changed it back because mm-hmm. we compromised with what God told us to do. Mm-hmm. We just keep on missing. These little pictures are about to become very big pictures.
And they do. And they're horrible pictures. Mm-hmm. Horrible. I'm not wild about the book of Judges. But it's there for a reason.
The Judges is real.
It is real. It's very real. It's just hard for me. This book's hard for me. So the man goes out to the land of the Hittites and builds a city, called the name of it Luz.
Hittites are their enemies.
Which is the name thereof unto this day. So he was in Bethel.
Right. The house of God.
Bread, wasn't it?
Beth is house. El is God. House of God. Bethlehem is house of bread.
Okay. But here we are.
Bethel is where Jacob makes a rock of pillow.
Right. That's what and
he sees the opening. Mm-hmm. This is their land.
This is their place. Yes.
This is not. That's what they keep telling you in this first chapter.
And they should know that story.
This
right?
is Jacob's place.
So what do you think?
This is Jacob's place, where the enemies reside.
So do you think that part of this is that they've forgotten?
This is God reminding them who they are.
Because what this sounds to me like is they've forgotten who their God is.
400 years will do that.
They've forgotten. They know. Right? They know the story about Joseph, because even in Samaria, when mm-hmm. the woman at the well meets Jesus, she says, "Hey, this is where Joseph did blah blah." But not only did I think they know the story.
They're learning all over.
I think they've forgotten. They've forgotten. It's kind of like having a form and a fashion. God, you've forgotten what your God can do. You've forgotten.
You've been handed the blessings of God from the previous generation, and you haven't realized what it took to get them. You haven't realized where they came from. You haven't realized who you are.
You've almost forgot the character of God.
You've been given all of it. Right? And now when the battles come up, you're not winning the battles. You're trying to compromise. So
what we talked about today a little bit, and let's just say this in case
God is with them.
In case this helps somebody put this in perspective, because this is where I'm coming from.
Are you tired of incomplete victory?
Oh yeah, already, and I'm only in the first chapter.
And all I'm saying is that's the point of this book. Like you say, I look at generations of Christians in the past, they were so much stronger than us. Yeah, they were.
They were fighting all the time.
They were fighting on the side. God was fighting with them, and they were fighting too.
We were talking today about
We've got a lot of incomplete victory.
If you don't have to work for it and you don't have to earn it, and someone just hands it to you. And I would think most of the people who watch us know that when you just get something, it doesn't have the same value as if you had to work for it and you had to build on it and you had to save for it and you had to get it, right?
Incomplete victory is coming to the Lord, but not changing your life. Battle Ready started because a young man in our church mm-hmm. came to us and said, I would like a class mm-hmm. where don't just tell me the story, but tell me how to apply it, mm-hmm. how to use it to live my life. Mm-hmm. And Battle Ready started, we started having conversations like that came from my husband and thoughts that we were having together, where we said, mm-hmm. what would happen to your life if you lived like you believed what it said? Mm-hmm. That's where Battle Ready came out of,
That's
right?
What it started
Don't just tell me about the Bible. Tell me how to make the Bible
mean something to me.
Mean something to me in real life. And for me to take it at its word. Mm-hmm. You say that all the time. Let's read it and let's believe it. Let's apply it.
Let's apply it.
We say that all the time. So when we're talking about incomplete victory, it's incomplete to say, I've heard the gospel and I believe what you're saying. And yes, but I'm not going to apply anything I've learned. I'm just going to keep living exactly the way I'm living. If you do truly get saved and you live like that, you're going to be in a constant state of discordance, of incomplete victory, of not enjoying it. Because you can't enjoy the world anymore because you know the truth. And you can't enjoy the church because you won't get out of the world. Right? And I'm not talking about what you think I'm talking about. Everybody says she's going to talk about the way you dress and the way. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about actually believing that God is right about all of it.
I agree.
And applying that to your life. And it's like the next little section about Manasseh is another incomplete victory. What happened? The walls of Jericho fell not because they were strong, but because they did exactly what God told them to do. Right?
Because
victory
there's
after
no
victory
way
after
that a wall
victory
falls so many feet thick just because you blow a trumpet.
In the book of Joshua, every victory, God goes, it's me. It's me. It's me. I'm doing it. Right? And they're believing him. This new generation is like, we'll go fight only if you go with me. And when we go fight, if there comes a time that we can just kind of compromise with it and let it go or get along, or instead of like conquering them, we'll make them our servants. Well, did you just forget Israel? You did, but it took 100 years. Did you just forget that the mightiest nation in the world, Egypt, was taken down by you when you were servants? Taken down by God through you. But keep bringing that in doesn't mean you're not changed, right? And they continue to bring in what they ought to be throwing out. Not to over-spiritualize it, but so do you.
So do we.
You
That's
keep
true.
bringing into your life what you ought to be getting rid of.
Right. And
because God has given you better. And he's given you the instructions. He's given you the right things. And you keep saying, yeah, but I want to keep that too.
But see how
there's only room for so much.
But that's what I wrote down over here. Somebody bunches of years ago. I said, wonder what would happen if they just believed it.
If they just believed
did what he told them, just did what he said.
Then you can defeat the chariots of iron. Right. Then you can win the victory without asking for help from somebody who's going to turn around and stab you in the back later on.
Because they're going to.
You can have complete victory because you're trusting in God. But we keep saying 1 foot in, 1 foot out. We're in the battle, but our heart's not in the battle. Right? We're not.
I really don't want to.
I really don't want to be in the battle. That was your all's war.
And then,
do you know what though? If you stop fighting the war, you lose.
Yeah. And that's the bad thing about the book of Judges, because by the time you get to the end of it, they are so far gone that you almost. But it only takes a little compromise to start. But they're so far gone, you don't think they can even get back because of all the things that they do. But they do.
And yet God sends them leadership, and that's what we're going to explore in this book. What happens when a true leader who listens to God rises up? What happens when you actually take God at his word? Well, victory comes back. Right? And not just partial victory, complete victory. He expands your borders. He expands your territory.
And then you also see that there's one coming who is not going to fall back.
Who's not going to fall back.
Who's not going to, he gives it, he does everything, all the hard stuff. Because when it starts to get hard is when we back up. Sometimes we're just lazy. But when it starts to get hard is usually when we back up. When it seems like it's too much. And maybe I shouldn't do that.
And not to sound like a 3-point sermon. We joke about that. Not to sound like a 3-point sermon. That names of things matters too. Because we start, things that used to be named sin, we start naming something else. We start giving it a prettier sounding name. We start saying that this is not sin. Our generation, right?
That's true.
Has renamed these things. Where the previous generation said, no, that's not coming in. We've just given it a different name. We don't call it that anymore. We don't call that. Well, whatever you want to go. I don't want to go into specifics because the specifics of that don't matter. The thing is, was sin is sin. What was wrong is wrong.
It didn't change.
Just because you change the name, right?
It doesn't change the problem.
It doesn't change the fact that this is what it is. This is Bethel. This is where, right? He met with the angel of God. This is where he slept on a stone. This is the place. Where now you call it Luz because that references what you're serving, what you are, and what you're. But this is still Bethel. This is still what God said it is. And where he said your spot is forever, Israel. This is where the sons of Jacob are going to be here.
And I think they knew the story about
They
Jacob.
knew the story.
But they don't know the God.
But there's learning. He's with them, but they're not with him.
They're not with him yet.
Not totally and not completely with their whole heart. That's what we keep getting, is that they're not quite there yet. And why are they not there yet? Well, their leaders are gone. And the next leader stepping up hasn't stepped up yet.
And Judah's going, well, I'll go if you go.
You know what?
Neither.
A lack of leadership, you think, well, everybody can do what they want. When everybody does right in their own eyes, that's not a good thing. No. Leadership is a good thing to have.
It is. It absolutely is.
And to bring you back to what God requires of you to do, right? And how he would have you conduct yourself.
So let's just keep going. Look at all these 12 tribes or 12 groups of people. Verse 27, neither did Manasseh drive out the inhabitants of Bethshean and her towns, nor Tanakh and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Dor and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Ibleam and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Megiddo, that's right, and her towns. But the Canaanites would dwell in that land.
That's a problem.
And it came to pass when Israel was strong that they put the Canaanites to tribute and did not utterly drive them out.
We'll rather, listen, a compromise.
Don't you feel
sad? You
sad?
can stay here.
This
You just
makes
have to
me
pay us
sad
money.
even before we get into the gory stuff.
Right?
This makes me sad.
It's just, you don't have to leave. Just pay us money and you can stay.
You can stay.
The fight's too hard. We're tired of the fight. And not because God wasn't with them, because they're not with him.
Verse 29, neither did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites that dwelled in Gezer, but the Canaanites dwelled in Gezer among them. What did God
Don't
say?
do that.
What did Moses say? Don't let them dwell with you.
He said it's cursed.
Don't
the judgment is
coming
for these people, and what
because
they're going to cause
you to stay away. They're going to cause you to serve other gods, and you're going to step away from me. Don't do that. He said that very plainly. Don't do that. Verse 30, neither did Zebulun drive out the inhabitants of Kitron, nor the inhabitants of Nahalol, but the Canaanites dwelt among them and became tributaries. Neither did Asher drive out so here we go, tribe after tribe after tribe. Neither did Asher drive out the inhabitants, nor the inhabitants of Zidon, nor of Elab, nor of Achzib, nor of Helba, nor of Aphek, nor of Rehob.
Those names will come back.
But the Asherites dwelt among the Canaanites. See that change? Did you notice that? Because they dwelt among them. Now the Asherites are dwelling among. Instead of the Canaanites dwelling with them, they're dwelling with them.
Crouching back in.
Neither did Naphtali drive out the inhabitants of Bethshemesh, nor the inhabitants of Bethanath. But he dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Bethshemesh and Bethanath became tributaries unto them. And the Amorites forced the children of Dan into the mountain, for they would not suffer them to come down to the valley. So that's not even a partial victory. That's a complete, you don't even win.
They lost.
But the Amorites would dwell in Mount Heres, in Ajalon, and in Shaalbim. Yet the hand of the house of Joseph prevailed, so that they became tributaries. Halfway. And the coast of the Amorites was from the going up to Akrabim, from the rock and upward.
So the application part, the battle ready part of this lesson is this. As a believer in God, you've got the Holy Spirit of God, the third part of the Trinity, dwelling inside of you. You've been saved from your sin. You've got an eternity in heaven, and there are all kinds of victories over the enemies that are in your life that God would go with you to fight and have you utterly defeat. But sometimes we have settled for partial victory, or we've lost.
Or we've lost
or we've let it creep back in. And we've let these things that we ought to be master of master us. Right? And push back our boundaries and push back our border and our effectiveness and our witness. And every time we believe the voice of the enemy more than we believe the voice of God, those things crouch back in.
And we're provoking.
And we think because our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents were great in the Lord, well, that just gets handed down to you. No, you have your own battle to fight. You have your own thing to pick up and do. You can't just sit there on somebody else's victory. right?
True.
And you can't have that. What do we call it today? Everybody's constantly talking about it in our generation politically. The entitlement attitude. Like, I just deserve to have it handed to me. God doesn't work that way.
At all.
God wins the victory, but he always expects us to stand on his word and do what he's asked us to do.
Because
in
somebody
obedience
else's
to him.
victory may depend on our
It
influence.
may absolutely do that. And God is the one who fights for us. He calls himself by that name.
Do you kind of get the feel, and I say that because, do you kind of get the feel when they start to lose, then it's okay to lose?
Yeah.
It's like, we won, we kind of won.
They've become comfortable with losing.
So you can't do it if I can't do it.
They've been comfortable
right?
with this.
It's just like, well, okay, well, see, we're not going to win. So it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, there's not hardly any fight here. It's
the
like,
parallels are amazing.
I mean, really.
To our culture, they really are, where you think, you know what, it's okay.
Yeah, I'm just not going to say anything. I won't do anything. Wow. We're only in chapter 1 of Judges, but our time is up. So how do you want to sum it up? I think what you just said is probably the most important thing we've said all day.
Don't get comfortable with losing. God says we are more than conquerors.
And it's his good pleasure to give us the kingdom.
It's his pleasure to give us the kingdom.
He wants to bless
He's
us.
the God who fights for us. He's the God of angel armies, the God of hosts. Right? That's who he is. He's the winner.
He's the winner.
Now, winning looks different depending on the situation you're in, but God wins these things. And we've gotten to the point where we're like, well, you know, maybe God can. Maybe he might.
Yeah, I don't know.
Or maybe we should just believe he is who he said he is and he can do what he said he could do.
Because he can.
Because what if you lived this week
what would
like
happen
you believed it was
if
true?
If you had just believed what he said.
Right.
Just believe
What if you
what
did
he said.
What if you wake up in the morning and you believe him? What would it change? What would you do differently if you believed what he said?
If you believed he was looking out for your best
if you
interest.
lived the day battle ready.
If you did that. Well, I think that's your homework. We're going to leave that as homework then. Wake up, or even just start now. Believe what he says, because what he says is true. And get to know, I've thought about some folks who I've seen come and go. And I always wonder if they ever actually read. They only know what they've heard about Scripture. And we're going to tell you, we don't want you to do that. We want you to open this book up and read it for yourself. God will deal with you as you read his word. So, anything else?
That's it.
All right. Keep your Bibles out. Get them out and read. Get to church tomorrow morning and tomorrow evening if you can. Stay battle ready. Lord willing, we'll see you next week.